The type of woman he underestimates every time. He spotted you like they always do. Not with urgency, but calculation. The kind of attention that doesn't rush, doesn't stumble over flattery, doesn't even look all that impressed at first. Because men like him don't chase, they select. And what he saw in you wasn't just softness or beauty. It was the opening. The one thing all manipulators quietly hunt for. Someone who hasn't fully realized her power yet. Not weak, but open. Not naive, but forgiving. The kind of woman who still believes that if she just loves right, stays kind, and gives him space, he'll eventually rise to meet her. That's who you were when he thought you'd be easy to play. He didn't need to come on strong. In fact, the slow start is part of the script. If he had moved too fast, it would have tipped his hand. So instead, he let you feel like you had room. Room to initiate, to suggest plans, to offer yourself in small, generous ways. He let you feel safe enough to lean in first. Because that's what players do when they want to own the power, without ever appearing to take it. He mirrored your hopes, reflected back your depth, picked up on your language and rhythm and gave it right back to you, just enough to make you feel seen. You mistook that for connection, but it was coordination, alignment, not intimacy. He was playing the long game, and his timing was perfect, just present enough to stay on your mind, just absent enough to create a quiet ache that made you lean harder into trying. And once you leaned, that's when he really started. The breadcrumbs, the intermittent warmth, the non-answers disguised as vulnerability, the conversations that left you wondering if you were too much or not enough, and above all, the way he'd disappear just long enough to make your body miss him, then reappear before your heart fully moved on. You see, they don't want love, they want control, and control doesn't require commitment. It only requires access. That's why he didn't try to win you with depth. He tried to confuse you with closeness, to blur the lines between emotional resonance and psychological control. He didn't need to say much. He just needed to teach you, slowly and invisibly, that your worth was up for negotiation. And he was the one who set the terms. But what he didn't know was this. Something in you was already changing, not because of him, but because of the exhaustion. The way your soul started to recognize that you were starving in a relationship where you were the only one feeding it. And that's when the shift began. Quietly, almost invisibly at first. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped making excuses for his distance. You stopped pretending you didn't notice how he'd vanish when things got too real, too inconvenient, or too vulnerable. And maybe the scariest part for him? You stopped reaching out when he pulled away. He thought he could disappear without consequences. But he didn't realize you were studying the silences. You were learning what not to believe. You were waking up not with rage, but with clarity. Because clarity doesn't scream. It walks away. That's what he never counted on. That the same softness he tried to exploit would one day become your shield. That your patience would turn into boundaries. That your kindness would find its spine. And that the woman, who once over-explained her worth, would finally stop trying to prove it at all. That's the moment the game changed. He thought he could ghost you, and then come back. Thought he could give you just enough to keep your heart open, and your self-trust low. But this time, you didn't wait for the apology. You didn't go back and reread old messages looking for proof that it meant something. You didn't chase closure from someone who profits off your confusion. You didn't rage. You didn't beg. You simply didn't respond. And that silence, your first act of self-respect, hit him harder than anything you could have said. Because men like him don't fear losing you while they still have access to your energy. They fear the moment they feel you pulling it back. when there's no argument, no drama, no explanation, just absence, just dignity. And beneath that quiet, power. He once had you believing that your sensitivity was your weakness, that your ability to care deeply made you easy to manipulate. But now, that very depth he once tried to use against you, it became your weapon, not to hurt him, but to protect yourself. Because when a woman finally learns that silence is an answer, that distance is a boundary, and that not everyone deserves the sacredness of her softness, she becomes untouchable. And what terrifies him most, he didn't see it coming. How he tests you without you even realizing it. He always thought silence was his weapon. It worked for so long. Ghosting mid-conversation, replying days later without explanation, withdrawing whenever you got too close to the truth. That's what men like him rely on. Not loud control, but quiet domination. They train you to fear the gaps, to fill the space with overthinking, apology, and self-blame. Every time he went cold, you softened. Every time he withdrew, you reached. And that gave him the illusion of power. Because to him, affection wasn't intimacy. It was leverage. Something to give and take at will. Something to withhold just long enough for you to feel desperate for the warmth again. But what happens when the silence stops working? What happens when the woman he thought he trained to chase stops chasing? At first, he doesn't even notice. He thinks you're just giving him space. He's seen you do it before, the waiting, the patient texts, the careful tone. So he assumes you'll do it again, that your heart will stay open no matter how long he takes to reappear. But this time, something's different. This time, you didn't wait. You didn't wonder what you did wrong. You didn't text first, asking if he was okay. You didn't perform emotional labor for a man who constantly outsourced his responsibility to you. And that shift, it startles him. Not immediately, but gradually, as your silence begins to carry a new frequency. Not the silence of longing, the silence of liberation. Because that's the one kind of silence a manipulative man can't handle. The kind that doesn't beg for answers. The kind that doesn't flinch. The kind that comes not from confusion, but from clarity. He sends a test message. Casual, maybe even funny, as if nothing happened. But you don't bite. He posts a story you're sure is meant for you, something nostalgic, something emotional, something laced with just enough feeling to stir the part of you that once ached for meaning in his chaos. But you don't view it. He waits. He watches. And for the first time, he's the one wondering. He thought he broke you. Instead, you broke the cycle. That's the part he didn't account for. That the same woman who once sent paragraphs trying to decode his mixed signals could become the same. Woman who now leaves him on read. Not out of pettiness, but out of peace. Because peace doesn't explain itself. And once you taste it, real peace, the kind that comes from no longer needing someone to behave differently in order to feel whole. You don't go back. Not even when they come back softer. Not even when they call you the one who got away. Not even when they finally say all the right things. Because you've learned. When a man only learns your value after he's lost access to it, that's not love. That's possession disguised as regret. And you're not here to be reclaimed. You're here to be met. Fully, consistently, and with the kind of reverence that doesn't require losing you first. What scares him now isn't your silence. It's your certainty. The way you move like a woman, who no longer needs to be understood in order to feel validated. The way your energy has shifted. Not louder, not colder, but firmer. Like someone who has finally decided that her softness is sacred, and not everyone deserves a seat at that table. He doesn't know how to respond to that, because manipulative men don't know what to do with women they can't unbalance. They don't know how to hold space with someone who won't beg for the bare minimum. They don't know how to reconnect when the hook they once used, your confusion, no longer works. You've ruined the game by walking away from the board. And now he's standing in the ruins of what he thought he'd always control, realizing he never really knew you at all. He knew your empathy. He knew your effort. He knew your hope. But he never truly understood the woman underneath all of that. The woman who, when pushed to the edge, wouldn't scream, but leave, not to punish, but to preserve. Because when a woman who leads with her heart finally learns that love should never cost her her sanity, she doesn't just reclaim her power, she becomes unplayable, the shift that shattered his illusion. There comes a moment, subtle at first, then deafening, when the balance of power begins to tilt. The game he thought he was playing so masterfully starts unraveling. Not because you exploded, not because you begged, not because you tried to change him, but because you didn't. You didn't text back right away. You didn't explain your silence. You didn't demand more. You didn't try to fix the growing coldness between you. You let it be cold. And in that chill, he met something he wasn't prepared for: the absence of your warmth. Men who play with women's hearts are used to the cycle. They pull away, you chase. They act cold, you try to warm them. They provoke insecurity, and you plead for reassurance. It keeps the power firmly in their hands. They're used to emotional pursuit being the glue that holds the dynamic together. But when a woman stops trying, something ancient and primal collapses within them. The game no longer holds shape. His seduction loses gravity, because suddenly you're no longer orbiting him. You are your own center of gravity now, and he's left floating in the empty space where your validation used to live. And it wrecks him, because underneath the ego and bravado, he wasn't playing for fun. He was playing to prove something, that he still had power, that he could still dominate emotionally, that he could still bait you into proving your worth to him. When you removed yourself from that equation, not with rage, but with quiet detachment, it confronted the very fear that made him play the game in the first place. The fear of being powerless to truly affect a woman of value. He tried to bait a reaction, but you just sat with your silence. He expected a breakdown, and instead, you gave him stillness. He tried to trigger the insecurity he once saw in your eyes. But this time, all he saw was calm. Not passive resignation, not bitterness, just a calm self-certainty that said, "I'm not angry. I'm just done participating." This kind of shift isn't loud, but it is seismic. It shakes his perception of control. Because now, instead of you wondering if you're good enough for him, he's starting to question if he was ever enough for you. And that wasn't in the script. You were supposed to unravel. You were supposed to chase. You were supposed to need him to feel okay again. But instead, you became the mirror he never wanted to face. You reflected back his own emotional immaturity, not through criticism, but through indifference. You didn't argue with his lies. You didn't protest the disrespect. You didn't fight for clarity. You walked away from the fog, and in doing so, showed just how lost he really is. He thought you'd be easy to manipulate because you loved him, but now he sees the truth. Your love was not weakness. Your empathy was not naivete. Your patience wasn't a lack of options. It was a conscious choice. And now you're making a different one. This is the moment when many men who play games finally feel the consequences of their own emotional immaturity. Because there's nothing quite as haunting as realizing you were holding the woman who would have given you the world, and you dropped her to chase a high you'll never find again. He underestimated you. He thought you needed him to feel whole. He thought he could keep you close while doing the bare minimum. But now he sees You're not the one who needs to prove anything anymore. He does, and he doesn't know how. Because what he relied on, your forgiveness, your softness, your effort, has been replaced with a woman who no longer just loves him. She loves herself more. When silence becomes the loudest answer, there's a kind of silence that screams louder than rage. Not the silence of passivity, not the silence of fear, but the silence of a woman who has finally seen enough. She's not giving the silent treatment to manipulate. She's not withdrawing to make him chase. She's simply gone inward, where her peace now lives. And that shift, that deep stillness, terrifies him in a way he'll never say out loud. Because now he's alone with something far more threatening than your voice. His own. You see, when he could provoke you into reacting, he felt powerful. When he could get you to cry, to question yourself, to explain, to fix, to argue, to plead, that meant he still mattered. That meant he still had control. His validation came not from love, but from how well he could disturb your calm. But when you went quiet, not cold, just still, it pulled the rug out from under his ego. He can no longer locate himself in your emotions. He no longer knows where you stand. And more importantly, he no longer knows where he stands with you. And that ambiguity, it eats away at him. Because now, for the first time, he's the one guessing. He's the one overthinking. He's the one scrolling through old messages, replaying old conversations, trying to decode where exactly he lost you. But here's the thing. He didn't lose you in a dramatic fight. He lost you in all the little moments he didn't take you seriously. When he laughed off your needs. When he gaslit your intuition. When he tested your boundaries to see if they were real. When he mistook your patience for permission. And now, his punishment isn't a confrontation. It's absence. Not just the absence of your presence, but the absence of his own significance in your emotional world. And it crushes him in a way he never saw coming. Because deep down, the power he had over you was the only real power he had. It wasn't just about you. It was about how you made him feel relevant, worthy, chosen, dominant. Now, your silence reflects how irrelevant he's become in the emotional universe he once ruled. You don't reach out. You don't explain. You don't perform closure. You let him sit with the ghost of who he could have been in your life. And that ghost? It's haunting. Because here's the truth. Silence has a way of revealing the parts of us we try hardest to ignore. And in your silence, he's finally being forced to meet the part of himself that's empty. He'll check if you've watched his stories. He'll post things designed to get your attention. He'll reach out with vague messages, hoping to bait you into reacting. He may even start acting nice again, trying to reset the dynamic. Not because he's changed, but because he can't stand the void you've left behind. He's realizing now, you were the warmth he thought he could play with. And now that it's gone, he's colder than he ever expected to be. You didn't yell. You didn't shame him. You didn't try to convince him of your worth. You just stopped giving him the chance to misunderstand it. And that's what's breaking him. Because now the game is over. And the silence is telling him exactly what he tried to ignore. She was never the fool. He was. She was never the fool he was. There's a moment, quiet and irreversible, when he realizes the truth. You weren't the weak one. You were the woman who loved him with strength he didn't know how to hold. And now that strength is gone, he thought you were easy to manipulate because you gave chances. He thought you were naive because you wanted clarity. He thought you were desperate because you stayed longer than you should have. But what he never understood was that you weren't staying for him. You were staying for you to be sure, to be thorough, to walk away knowing you gave it your all. So when you left, you'd never question yourself again. And now, the final blow to his ego isn't your anger. It's your indifference. Because there's nothing more unnerving to a man who played games than a woman who no longer plays at all. He lost the upper hand the moment you realized he was never holding anything real. And here's what cuts the deepest. He didn't just lose access to you. He lost the version of himself you reflected back to him. The man you believed he could become. The love you were ready to give him. The future he once pretended to want, but never truly earned. He thought he had time. He thought you'd always be there. He thought you couldn't walk away without begging him to stop you. But you did. And now, he's stuck replaying every moment where he laughed. Dismissed, minimized, ignored. Because all those little moments, they're echoing now, louder than your voice ever did. And if he ever speaks about you again, it will sound something like this. She cared too much. She was always overthinking. She was too emotional. But what he'll never say out loud is, she saw right through me. She gave me chances I didn't deserve. She walked away without needing to destroy me first. He'll bury the truth in bravado. He'll act unbothered. He'll pretend he's moved on. But he hasn't, because he knows, deep down, that you weren't the fool. He was the one who mistook gold for glitter. He was the one who thought your heart would be easy to win, easy to break, easy to get back. But now he knows. You were never the woman he thought you were. You were far more. Too deep to manipulate. Too self-aware to stay trapped. Too powerful to be used for his ego's survival. And that realization? It won't go away. Not next month. Not next year. Not when he's with someone new. Because once a man meets a woman who truly saw him and still chose to walk away in peace, there's no forgetting her. You were his mirror, his test, and ultimately, his consequence. So if you're watching this, doubting your worth, second-guessing your silence, missing the version of him you once believed in, don't. He's not thinking about what you did wrong. He's haunted by the fact that you finally did everything right. And if you ever wonder what kind of woman truly changes the game, it's not the loudest, not the prettiest, not the most indifferent. It's the woman who knew her worth and refused to let him forget it.